Paul St-Pierre Plamondon is leader of the PQ, and his fortunes and the party's fortunes have certainly been on the rise, culminating, at least today, in a new poll, Palace poll, that shows that he is farther ahead than he's ever been before. 32% support for them, 21% for the CAQ. That's their worst numbers, by the way, since 2016. So I had a chance, along with Bill Brownstein of the Gazette and Leslie Chesterman, to sit down for a podcast, which runs about 50 minutes long. You can find it by going to YouTube, or you can go to the MontrealGazette.com. It'd be there as well. It's called The Corner Booth. Wanted you to hear some of what we talked about, because this will lead into a question we're going to ask tomorrow about what do you think about this guy? I know whenever we have had him on for brief segments, right, we've always come away looking at each other going, you know what? Smart guy, like this guy. It's a shame that separation is part of their platform.
It's just that one little
tiny
thing.
Tiny,
huge issue.
So now, a couple of issues, and we start off by talking about immigration. That's a big issue right now, obviously. Big because the PQ wanted to go one way, and all the other parties, would it seem, certainly the Liberals, would like to see it climb. So here is his reaction, Paul St-Pierre Plamondon, on immigration.
What I've said clearly last week during our caucus is what has changed since the election of 2022 is that we realize that in terms of housing, the topic of temporary immigration is much more important than permanent immigration. Why? Last year we had around 60,000 permanent immigrants. At the same time, we had 167 new temporary immigrants for a total of 530,000 on the territory. So if you look at housing and you look offer and demand, we built around 30,000 units of housing for 230,000 new persons on the territory. So at that point, you can play with the blocks as much as you want. It just doesn't correspond. It just doesn't fit. And so we need to discuss responsibly, intelligently of that topic, especially the topic of temporary immigration. I have said in the election of 2022 that for permanent immigration, we think that 35,000 corresponds better to our capacity of housing integration in French and public services, a capacity to deliver the services. It is the historical number before Jean Charest raised that figure, saying it would solve the shortage of labor. So that's a lie. There's no correlation between shortage of labor and raising the immigration. It's been done in Ontario, in Quebec for the past 30 years, and it's not solved yet. And that's because a person, whether immigrant or not, a person is a worker and a consumer at the same time, and bottom line, it evens up. It is the same proportion. So we think at 35,000 we're in a historical figure that at that time, if you remember, there was no housing crisis. The situation was pretty stable. I said that we would recalculate looking at 2026, the next election. We will restart a new sequence of calculations and through which we will put more emphasis on temporary immigration. So we are in that process right now. I don't think there's moral virtue in raising immigration numbers every year. There's moral virtue in hosting fairly and responsibly every person who becomes a Quebecer. If we are at a point where people who come on the territory have no place to go and become homeless, if we are at a point where we have trouble education-wise, for instance, to create classes and provide fair and quality services in terms of education, that's not ethically or morally responsible. So raising, and that's Trudeau's philosophy. It was really like the Century Initiative. We want 100 million Canadians by 2100. There's no moral virtue to that. There's no economic foundation neither, because the idea that it will solve labor shortage has proven to be incorrect. Economists are now confirming that. And there will always be immigration, and that's fair, that's fine. But we have a responsibility to make sure that people have a roof and have services.
Talking about morally what should happen with respect to immigration, he makes his point, and the point is, at least one of the points, that we've tried this up until now, and it does not. It does not help the labor situation. That's the PQ position. And then the question was asked, and this is the big one, of course, for Anglos here. The question was asked and presented in such a way, and I think Leslie said, of course, Anglophones are wary of separation and voting for the PQ. And the key words there were, of course, we're wary. We always have been. This is what he said.
I wouldn't accept the one part of your question that says, of course, we're wary of independence. It shouldn't be of course. Obviously, someone, a Quebecer, whether Anglophone or Francophone, can be in agreement or against a society project such as becoming a country. But I don't start with the idea that, of course, if we get back $82 billion in revenue we send to Ottawa every year, and we say, since the public service in Ottawa has grown by 40% since Trudeau's in power, since there are a lot of double missions, a lot of redundancy, and we can make important savings, can we redirect that money to fundamental direct services to the population, such as healthcare, education, and so on? That concerns everyone. And so I don't start with the idea that Anglophones are against Quebec independence. They have voted against it historically. And then comes your question, well, why should we or could we vote PQ? As you know, fear has played a big role on both sides in the referendums and in Quebec politics in general. So it's fear of an economic catastrophe if we become a country. It's also fear of how dangerous an autonomous Quebec would be in terms of deciding by ourselves. It used to be that Ottawa is so much more competent than the public service in Quebec. I don't think it holds anymore.
No.
I think what happens in Ottawa is degradation that is obvious to people nowadays. I don't think people assume that a public service that is very far from our needs in Ottawa is more effective than in Quebec. It used to be the case. So what I can do as a leader of the Parti Québécois is make myself available to every Quebecer to explain why I think we have more prosperity and more impact internationally if we do exist, why I think we should build on what we have in common rather than always build on differences. And I think the Canadian model of communitarism is really putting emphasis on identity towards an ethno-cultural group, a religious group, or any subgroup. And for Quebec, it is a real challenge. I don't think we see it that way. So the concept of citizenship in the Parti Québécois and a free Quebec is one where we are all Quebecers and we build on what we have in common. And the most I can do is to make myself available, be responsible, be sharp, work well, and explain why a guy like me, who did his studies at McGill, at Oxford, who obviously can speak English very well. I mean, it's not like I've been in a basement for the past 25 years locked up. And I think it's in our interest and it's necessary to become a country. So all I can do is do that responsibly, intelligently, and say to people, at least if you can listen to why I'm doing this, then it's up to you to decide, but I can't.
But I want to just go back. If you Anglos aside, in Quebec, we know historically, and I'm saying historically, say over the last 10 years, so within a narrow frame, support for separation has always been at around 30%. You can't win an election provincially if separation is your main cause with that kind of support for separatism.
No, in the past 2 years, we're around 36, 37, 38. We've hit...
You can't win an election with that, can you?
Yeah. Technically speaking, yes, you can win an election.
But can you win a referendum?
I don't.
Which is what you want to do in your first mandate.
But I don't do politics like that. I do not. I cannot force people to vote in one way or another. I do not make calculations like this, and I accept that it might be that I never become premier, because of what I think is the best interest of Quebec. And yet, I really think it's our best interest. And that in terms of social cohesion, in terms of wealth, in terms of international impact, we are much better off deciding by ourselves based on our own interests, not based on Alberta's oil interest or based on... Canada is not... I'm not against Canada. I actually cheer for Team Canada in hockey or other things. All I'm saying is that if you have a too large unit with competing interests and competing realities in one decisional space, well, it is basically a conflict of interest. And historically, because we are not very heavy demographically in Quebec, and because our reality in Quebec is so different from other places in Canada, historically our interest is often disregarded, comes second or third after other provinces. So it's just a recognition that you're always better off deciding based on your own interests than letting other interests decide for you, especially if we have more difficult years ahead in terms of global warming, geopolitical instability. I'd rather have Quebec decide for itself, and I think it concerns Anglophone Quebecers just as Francophone Quebecers. And then that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Look, you can hear the whole thing. As I said, it went on for about 50 minutes. And the noise in back, in case you're wondering, is we do these at the Stone Deli. So there are actually people there having breakfast, whatever else. We taped these a couple of days ago. You can go to YouTube. We'll post a link on our site. You can hear this if you want to again, and there'll be a link there. You can see it on YouTube as well.